Welcome to FedScoopTV. I'm FedScoop's editorial director, Camille Tootie, and I'm sitting here with Kathy Conrad from GSA. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Let's talk a little bit about the open source trends in government. What are you seeing right now?
So with the extraordinary budget pressure that we're all under, we're seeing increasing use of open source across government. In many cases, we're looking first at open source tools and code to see if there are those available that fit our needs and meet our use case. We really are driving toward efficiency and reuse to the extent that we can. If you look just at the open data or open government repository in GitHub, you'll find over 415 projects from all across government with things like web crawlers and APIs and test scripts. Really good indication of the breadth of open source across government.
What are some of the security challenges when it comes to incorporating open source?
Well, first, I think a lot of people start with the presumption that open source by its very nature, in fact, is less secure, when what we found is exactly the opposite. With so many eyeballs on the code and with so many opportunities for people across a really, really diverse community to contribute to the code, vulnerabilities are more easily detected and more broadly mitigated across government. That said, like with most things, there of course are challenges. Some of those include that there are many, many third-party widgets and products layered on top of an open source stack. And so if you find a vulnerability in the open source, you then have to mitigate it through the rest of the stack. And in some cases, release schedules may be out of sync, so you find a vulnerability in the open source code, but the release schedule for some third-party product that's layered on top of it may not be right away. So that's one of the challenges that we're tackling at GSA and elsewhere across government.
Have you found that the government is using and leveraging open source in a different way when you compare it to the use of the private sector?
Yeah, in many ways, the government has a mission geared toward the public. So contributing to the public good is really baked into our culture. So I think in some ways that makes, once people get over the initial hump of, oh, this is new, this is different, it's really a very good fit for the government to be contributing back into this broader community. One of the other differences is that, or one of the other challenges, is that in the government, because we often do open source projects with broad collaborative teams, it may not be clear who is responsible for maintaining and governing that code base. Whereas in the private sector, I think that there's often a more clearly identified owner of that responsibility.
And looking at the future, how do you see that use of open source evolve over the years?
Well, I certainly think it'll continue to grow and expand. There's just too much budget pressure to turn back. And as I said, it's really so consistent with the mission of government to be collaborating and contributing back. So I don't think it will slow down by any means. And in particular, I think there'll be communities of sort of open source communities that will grow and continue to be built, particularly around vertical markets like healthcare or finance, to help address the governance issue that I just mentioned. I think we'll also see, given the really explosive use of mobile across government, you'll see lots and lots of reusable code snippets that will be used to drive mobile apps and mobile and web services across government.
Kathy, very interesting. Thanks for taking the time to speak with FedScoopTV. We appreciate it.
Well, and thank you for having me.